Femi is here.
Morning.
Morning.
How's
Good morning,
everybody?
Good
Good
morning.
Hi.
Let's go straight
I'm
to you,
fine,
Femi.
thank you.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let us go straight into Good Morning, Professor Killer. Let me tell you about what's happening in the world, around the world even. Let's start in the United States, where Donald Trump is pausing all military aid for Ukraine after that disastrous Oval Office meeting with his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky, last week. Now, the White House is reportedly reviewing whether the billions of dollars given to Kyiv are contributing to a solution to end Ukraine's war against invading Russian forces. Interestingly enough, Republican congressman said that he was confident that a proposed minerals deal between the two countries would still be signed soon. Now, House Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, who represents a district in Pennsylvania, said that he had a lengthy and productive talk with Andriy Yermak, who is Zelensky's chief of staff, about this deal. And that was actually confirmed by Yermak himself, but he actually talks about them finding a pathway to peace as opposed to this mineral deal. That being said, meanwhile, President Donald Trump says that those long-threatened 25% US tariffs against Canada and Mexico will start today. China isn't exempt, as the United States is doubling the levy on Chinese imports to 20% in response to accusations that Beijing is not doing enough to stop the flow of fentanyl into the States. Beijing has rejected that accusation and says it will hit back against Trump's tariffs, which it describes as a typical act of unilateralism and bullying. Canada has vowed to retaliate with 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of US goods. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Canada will first target $30 billion worth of products and target the remaining $125 billion worth of products over 21 days. And finally, Guinea-Bissau's president, Umaru Sissoco Embalou, has threatened to expel a political mission sent to his country by the Economic Community of West African States, as we know as ECOWAS. Now, a dispute over when Embalou's presidential term, which began in 2020, should end, has heightened tensions that risk unrest in a nation with a history of military coups. The tiny West African nation's political opposition says Embalou's term should have expired last week, while the Supreme Court of Justice has ruled that it ends on September 4th. Now, last week, Embalou visited Moscow for talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin in the latest sign of a drive by Moscow to build up economic and security relationships with countries in West and Central Africa. Now, Russian and Portuguese news, Guinea-Bissau is a Portuguese colony, those outlets have quoted a Guinea-Bissau minister as saying that Russian aluminium company Rusal is interested in building a railway and port in the country, exploring for bauxite. I mean, we'll get to the real crux of it eventually, because you talk about collaboration and security ties. The real bottom line is these countries have something you want, and you're coming to take it. So this is what we have. Professor Killer, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think two major things. Number one, let's start from USA and Ukraine. The disastrous meeting, as you termed it, was an excuse. Trump was going to pause their collaboration and their aid to Ukraine anyway.
Yes.
He thinks Zelensky is wrong. He thinks Zelensky started the war. He thinks the war should have ended, and he thinks Russia has won the war. So he wants Zelensky to just keep quiet, takes whatever he gives, and feel sorry for starting the war at all. That is Trump. Every other thing is leading to that. Back to Africa and Russia. So something fascinating is playing on the world. We have the West, we have the USA, we have China, and we have Russia. And there is a new rush for Africa and for the rest of the world. The new sphere of influence, as we used to call it in the international relations. So it's going to be interesting to see how Africans react. My prediction is that some are going to go towards the West, some are going to go towards Russia and China. And I think there's going to be two things going on. China and Russia are going to be putting on the table very interesting deals, infrastructure, partnership, and pump up money. USA and the West are going to counter that with some maneuvering. They have less thing to offer on the table, at least not in terms like China and Russia can do. So they're going to be dealing with the leadership. All of a sudden, we're going to be having African leaders that are friends of France, friends of the USA, and that is the new sphere of influence that is coming up to fore. But it's about natural resources, raw materials, and quest for sphere of influence. That is what is going on in the geopolitical scene now.
It's always about that in terms of what the superpowers, in this instance, or colonial masters, can gain from African countries. And that's why I keep asking, when is Africa going to wake up? Because at the end of the day, we keep going, it's like moving from one slave master to another, looking for going from one, slave master to another. So Guinea-Bissau President Mbalo is looking for an ally in Russia, especially to perpetuate his illegality. His tenure ended last year in November.
Yes.
However, he's said no, his elections will happen in November 2025, and he's also been able to obtain the Supreme Court ruling to support his move. Of course, opposition parties are not happy with that decision, and even the people are saying that they're going to embark on a nationwide strike to oppose this. ECOWAS mission went into Guinea-Bissau to try and mediate and get a roadmap to conducting an election this year. Unfortunately, they were threatened, and now they left. They left on the 1st of March, citing these concerns. So, two things here. We've often talked about ECOWAS as a regional body and how powerful or influential they are on this with regards to the West African states. We have seen in recent times 3 countries leave ECOWAS. Yes. They've talked about the fact that, okay, despite the fact that they've left, I think they still have a few more months to reconsider and come back. And they're still trying to woo them back in. They have defied ECOWAS, and they are also they are forming alliance with Russia. Now Guinea-Bissau is in question, and if the success of the 3 countries that left ECOWAS, if they review the success and think that, okay, we want to go down that route as well, it means it's further depleting the influence and power of ECOWAS as a regional body. Okay. So I also think this is also a wake-up call for ECOWAS to rise up, to stand up. Why are countries within the regional bloc unwilling or unable to respect the institution or respect the regional bloc? It means they're losing power, they're losing influence. And unfortunately or coincidentally, this year they celebrate 50 years in existence, and this doesn't look good. I don't think there's anything worth celebrating, to be fair. I think they should put their house in order and see how they can come together to form a more powerful alliance where one country would not be able to entice these African countries. But I have to just say also sound a note of warning as well. Russia has come in. They are now the attractors that bringing, they have very nice attractions for this country, but it is not just for anything, or they're not being altruistic about it.
Exactly.
They're going to come in, and we've seen it play out in other countries. Even with the US, when the US was the superpower or coming into Africa, France, the same thing. It's never ended well. And that's why I said it's like moving from one to another. Yeah. And unfortunately, it looks like Russia is even worse. And I must say that Trump's actions are not helping either, especially his actions with regards to Africa pulling out aid and all that.
Yes.
It's making Russia look more attractive and the alternative.
Exactly that. Thank you, Ayo.
So a couple of things. I'll tell a story. Over the weekend, I was reading. What was I reading?
As always, as usual.
I was reading John Roge's report.
Okay.
Very decent book. John Roge went to Nazi Germany and he got all the files of how Nazis were funding the Americans against the Second World War. And in that report, I saw a very important story about a senator called Senator Ernest Linden, senator of Minnesota. He was in charge of the Senate committee asking European countries to pay America back for what they were spending on the war. And he was saying America should not advance further loans or monies to Europe to fight the war against Germany. This man was to die weeks after in a plane crash. The documents in his pockets were seen to be documents written by a man called Verick. Verick was a Hitler fixer. Senator Linden, an American senator, had been on the payroll of Nazi Germany and Hitler. Does that remind you of what's happening today in America?
It looks a bit familiar, doesn't it?
With what Donald Trump is doing? Does that remind you? All of a sudden, Trump pauses armament shipment to Ukraine. All of a sudden, he has told the American cybersecurity force to stand down against Russia. All of a sudden, he's trying now to remove sanctions against Russia. But he picks his battles. All of a sudden, in that same breath, as at the 1st of March, he gave assistance to Israel of $4 billion. So he's arming Israel to kill the people in Gaza, but Trump is his ally. Russia is his ally, so he's not going to do anything against Russia. And that's why the world is in a stalemate today. We have seen this happen, and history has taught us about the likes of how Russia or Germans then infiltrated the American ecosystem. So we know We know what is going on. But for those that are delusional, that still support Trump, the Mueller report further revealed the role Russia played in his emergence. The sad one for me about Africa is now that any despot finds allies in Russia. Just like the 3 renegade despots that overthrew their government and Embalo is trying to do now to sit tight in power.
Yes.
Russia will come in and Russia will take mineral resource. But the interesting thing is, the day Russia is tired of Embalo, Russia will fund opposition group within that same country and they'll mess Embalo up and they'll continue the cycle. Just like what Russia is doing in Sudan. At some point they were funding Hemeti, the Rapid Response Squad, Rapid Forces in Sudan.
Yes.
Now they are funding Al-Banan. So Africa keeps being played in this game as a pawn.
This is it. There's no loyalty in
That's
war.
just it.
There is none. Thank you for your great analysis as always. Let's move on to newspaper headlines across Nigeria. Let's begin with This Day. Now, This Day leads with this narrative of peace returning to Lagos 7 weeks after his ousting. Mudashiru Obasa returns as Speaker of the Lagos House of Assembly following Mojisola Miranda's resignation. Now, Miranda's return as Deputy Speaker, as lawmakers tearfully, as we see, accepted. We can pull up today's edition of This Day so that it matches, but essentially the lawmakers at the House tearfully accepted her resignation as the first woman speaker. The Lagos Assembly shake-up is the lead story on the New Telegraph, as well as the Punch, the Tribune, and the Daily Independent this morning, all of them taking in this shuffling at the helm of the Lagos House. And on this week's edition of The Advocate by Onikepo Braithwaite, she asks whether there is a conspiracy against women in governance in Nigeria. She actually goes on to argue that there is a conspiracy citing the experiences of course, Mojisola Miranda, asking if a man would be denigrated and threatened with being dragged out of the chamber the way she had been. And on the topic of Senator Natasha Akpoti, the Senate doesn't escape mention in her article either. Braithwaite writes that, is it not shameful that in 2025 the Nigerian Senate resembles a glorified boys' club? So another fantastic article from Onikepo there in this week's edition of The Advocate. Moving on to The Guardian, and in addition to that caricature we see depicting the Lagos State Assembly latest, the paper also features uproar following the closure of schools in Bauchi, Kano, Katsina and Kebbi during Ramadan, which has shut out 11.5 million children from school. It's actually a story also picked up by the Daily Sun, which leads with Catholic bishops rejecting the school closures in Bauchi. Now, on the front page of the Daily Trust, suspected Boko Haram terrorists have abducted the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering at the Nigerian Army University in Borno State, Professor Abubakar El Juma, along with other passengers. In addition to that, an APC chairman in Zamfara State, Malam Yakubu Sani, and 3 executive members were abducted by bandits on Saturday. And a police officer, Modestus Ojiebe, was rescued after he was abducted along the Abuja-Kaduna Expressway. So, a lot going on there. The Daily Trust does keep us abreast of the state of security in the country. And while there was, of course, the disheartening and disappointing news of those kidnappings, to hear that there has been at least one rescue is some sliver of salvage or hope. There we have. Those are our papers in Nigeria today.
Closing school for Ramadan, I think is wrong. I think it's unacceptable, and I think it's a violation of Nigerian constitution that's supposed to be a secular state. But I also think it is wrong for the opposition to be led by Christians. There is, even when you're right, there's appropriateness and a sense of decorum and a sense of not wanting conflict. I think the right people to have called for the school not to be closed should have been parents or concerned citizens, and the argument should have been a secular argument. If Christians want to help individuals, they can do it behind, but they should not be at the forefront. Because if you do this, what it appears, rightly or wrongly, is that Christians are interfering in matters of Islam, which shouldn't be. Nigeria is a multicultural rainbow coalition country, which we enjoy. Some of us who come from the part of the country where we have no qualms with people's religion find all these things strange. I think the rest of the world can learn from the Yoruba nation of Nigeria. We don't have this problem of Muslim-Christian thing, and I think we ought to be leading the conversation. So shame on those Yoruba-led associations who want to turn this to a battle of Christian versus Muslim. I say this as a Yoruba leader, this is alien to our way, and we should not be acting this way. The right thing in this matter is to say Nigeria is led by a constitution. What is our view on religious affairs of any kind of religion? And it might be a good time to remind us that be Islam or Christianity are actually alien and imported religion to us.
No, and I think any group should have the right to challenge, especially if you feel that. And what the bishops or the it shouldn't be whittled down to a religious, or it's bigger than that, or a religious altercation. It's not. And the National Association of Proprietors of Private School have actually come out. A lot of individuals, organizations have come out to speak against this. I think it would be interesting to also hear what the Minister for Education has said, because you cannot be doing something at federal level in terms of trying to tackle the number of out-of-school children, and then at state level is anti with the actions or the policies that they are taking. People have even cited that in countries, almost like we're doing more than in other countries like Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, in United Arab Emirates. They don't, their schools are not in any way shut down during. So you want to understand, is there anything beyond the fact that it's Ramadan? What is the rationale for this? And then is it an assumption that everyone in the state practices Islam? Some Muslims even choose not to fast, to be quite honest. It's a personal choice at the end of the day, even though it's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. But you cannot force people because you believe in a particular, if it's Muslim or Christian, we would condemn it, because we are talking about trying to prioritize education, particularly in the states that have the high numbers of out-of-school children, and with deem it fit to close school for 1 month, despite the justification for it. And we must continue to talk about it until these governors take on responsibility and stop making education such a disposable, asset in the state. I think that's where the crux of it is. Any group should come out, or every group should come out to decry until something happens.
When I remember the days Nigeria had seemingly good leadership, water run away me eye. Aye, water run away me eye. In 1983, Abubakar Rimi was head and governor of Kano State. Kano won the UNESCO Literacy Award. I ask, will Abubakar Rimi have closed schools in Kano then because of a period like this, when he knew that the literacy of the people in that area was more paramount? I rest my case.
Thank you very much, Adefemi. I hope the governors are not going to work as well for 1 month.
Well,
and their businesses are shut down as well for 1 month.
It must be that everybody sits down. And it's so funny because, like you say, Nigeria is largely multicultural. Yeah. And I grew up in a region of London which was also very multicultural. In fact, 90% of our student body was actually South Asian. So during Diwali, for example, you know that this is exactly what's happening, but you wouldn't have schools shut down. It just doesn't happen. And if anything, I think it makes fasting harder when you don't actually have something to keep you distracted from. But what can we say?
Well, thank you very much, Adefemi.